3 weeks before Carl Jung died, something happened that unsettled even him. He wasn't delirious. He wasn't afraid. And he wasn't speculating. He described it calmly to one of his closest friends and said only one sentence. "Now I know I was right all along." His friend asked, "Right about what?" Jung smiled and answered, "I saw what happens when the body begins to fail. The mind does not panic. It does not cling. It does something else entirely. It prepares for a transformation." This wasn't mysticism. This wasn't faith. This was observation. Jung had spent over 50 years studying the human psyche under extreme conditions: psychosis, grief, trauma, near death, and dying itself. He documented what people saw when the ego could no longer maintain control, and what he found disturbed the foundations of how we think about death. Because the mind doesn't collapse when death approaches. It reveals itself. What Jung saw in his final weeks was the same thing he had seen in countless patients. The same symbols, the same emotional shift, the same internal sequence. And it confirmed something radical. So what did Jung see? And why does it matter right now, while you're still alive? Let's slow down and look carefully. Most people misunderstand visions. They think visions are hallucinations. They think they're imagination. They think they're the brain malfunctioning under stress. Jung discovered the opposite. Visions are not produced by a breaking mind. They emerge when the mind stops filtering reality. For decades, Jung interviewed people on the edge of death, patients with terminal illness, survivors of near-death experiences, individuals undergoing deep psychological collapse. They all described the same thing: not confusion, not chaos, but clarity. They said the visions felt more real than waking life. That's when Jung realized something crucial. These visions are not random. They follow a psychological pattern, a pattern that reveals what the mind does when the ego can no longer maintain control. It doesn't shut down. It wakes up. Your conscious mind, the part that worries, plans, defends, and narrates your identity, is only a surface layer. Beneath it lies the unconscious, vast, intelligent, symbolic, and largely ignored. Under normal conditions, the ego acts like a filter. It limits perception so you can function. But when the body weakens, or when the ego is disrupted by crisis, meditation, or deep inner work, that filter loosens, and the unconscious begins to speak, not in language, in symbols. Jung called these archetypal visions, universal images that appear across cultures, religions, and time periods. Light, guides, passageways, sacred spaces, deceased loved ones. These are not cultural inventions. They are embedded structures of human consciousness. Jung wrote, "The visions are not created by the dying brain. They are revealed by it. The brain is a reducing valve. When it weakens, consciousness sees beyond it." Think about that. What if your daily perception is not reality itself, but a narrowed version of it? And what if moments of awe, terror, beauty, or surrender are cracks in that filter? Jung insisted this wasn't supernatural. This was psychology, the unconscious revealing what exists beyond the ego. Through decades of observation, Jung identified a sequence that appears repeatedly as death approaches. First, figures appear. People report guides, wise figures, ancestors, beings of light. Jung said these are not external entities. They are manifestations of the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche, preparing consciousness for transition. Second, light appears. Not harsh, not blinding, but overwhelmingly familiar. Patients described it as home. Jung believed this symbolized consciousness recognizing itself beyond form, no longer identified with the body. Third, fear disappears. Not because death is defeated, but because the ego dissolves. And when the ego dissolves, there is nothing left to protect. What remains cannot die because it was never born. Jung didn't just study this. He experienced it. In 1944, Jung suffered a heart attack and hovered between life and death. During that time, he had the most profound vision of his life. He saw Earth from above. He felt himself detached from identity. He experienced a state of being without fear, time, or form. And when he returned, He was disappointed, not because he feared death, but because he had tasted something beyond the ego. From that moment on, Jung knew something most people never realize until the very end. When the mind knows death is near, it doesn't deteriorate. It releases. Jung documented that in the final weeks of life, people often stop caring about things that once consumed them. Status, achievement, reputation, resentment. This isn't resignation. Jung called it clarity. The ego loosens. The self emerges. And with it comes vision. But here's the part most people miss. These visions are not exclusive to the dying. They appear anytime the ego weakens. Through meditation, through psychedelics, through breakdowns, through deep inner work. Jung said, what the dying experience at the end, the mystic experiences voluntarily. The same state, the same insight, the same truth. Across thousands of cases, Jung identified 3 recurring themes. First, unity, a felt sense, not a belief, that everything is connected. You are not separate from the world. You are the world, experiencing itself temporarily. Second, timelessness, past, present, and future collapse into a single perception. Life is seen as a whole. Every pain, every failure, every joy forming a pattern. Nothing wasted. Third, unconditional acceptance. Not emotional love, not attachment, but a recognition that everything you were was necessary. Jung did not call this God. He called it consciousness recognizing itself. Now here's the warning Jung left behind. Most people never experience this while alive. They spend their lives defending an identity that dissolves anyway. And only at the very end do they realize they were protecting something temporary. Jung's final visions showed him that Carl Jung, the man, the name, the role, was a single expression of something far greater. Consciousness itself, momentarily human. And when that form ended, consciousness did not. Here's the part that applies to you. These visions are already happening in your life. They just don't look dramatic. Jung called them numinous moments, brief experiences where the ego cracks. A moment of awe, a sudden stillness, a sense that reality is deeper than it appears. Most people dismiss them, but Jung said these moments follow the same pattern as deathbed visions. First, disconnection. What once mattered starts feeling hollow. This isn't depression. It's the ego weakening. Second, synchronicity. Meaningful coincidences that defy logic. Jung believed this revealed that consciousness is not confined to the brain. Third, withdrawal. A need for solitude. Not escape, but contact with something deeper. Fourth, questioning. Who am I? Why am I here? What is real? These are not philosophical questions. They're psychological signals. Transformation is approaching. The dying move through this in weeks. The living stretch it over decades, resisting every stage. Jung warned, what you're afraid of finding is not something alien. It's you. Jung developed a method to access this state deliberately. He called it active imagination. You sit in silence. No distraction. No intention. You allow images to arise. Not fantasies, but communications from the unconscious. You don't analyze them. You engage them. Because these images are parts of you that were never allowed to speak. The shadow, the forgotten self, the unlived life. And when you listen, change becomes inevitable. Jung's final visions were not unique. They were the culmination of a lifetime of inner work. He wasn't afraid of death because he had already been there. And his final message was clear. Don't wait. Don't defend the ego until it collapses. Turn inward now. Because the truth is simple and unsettling. You're not your thoughts. You are not your identity. You're not your body. You are the awareness witnessing all of it. And that awareness does not end.